The engine sputtered, then silence. One moment, he was flying. The next, he was plummeting into the frozen Alaskan unknown, alone. For 84 agonizing days during World War II, this airman battled starvation, frostbite, and the crushing weight of isolation. Discover the unbelievable true story of how one man's relentless will to live unlocked forgotten survival tactics and pushed the boundaries of human endurance. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with silence. 1 second, the engine was roaring, that familiar mechanical heartbeat every airman trusted with his life. Then it coughed, stuttered, and died. And in that horrible, stomach-dropping silence, he knew. He knew before the altimeter even registered the drop, before the controls stopped responding, before the Alaskan mountains began rising toward him like a wall of ancient, indifferent stone. The crash wasn't graceful. It wasn't cinematic. It was brutal and fast and ugly. The kind of thing that leaves a man not knowing what hurts first, because everything hurts all at once. Metal screamed. The fuselage split. Ice and snow burst through the shattered windshield like the world itself had punched him in the face. And then stillness. Cold, suffocating, absolute stillness. He didn't know how long he was unconscious. Minutes, maybe longer. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he felt wasn't pain. It was cold. The kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin. It reaches inside you and squeezes. The kind of cold that whispers, "You are not supposed to be here." And yet, he was here. He pulled himself out of the wreckage with hands that barely worked, fingers already going numb at the tips. He stood up, looked around, and saw nothing but wilderness. White-capped peaks in every direction. Dense spruce forests below him. No roads, no smoke. No signs of civilization anywhere on the horizon. Just sky, stone, snow, and silence. The realization didn't hit him all at once. It came in waves. First, the obvious. The plane is destroyed. Then, the terrifying "no one saw me go down." And finally, the one thought that nearly buckled his knees. No one is coming. Not today. Maybe not for a long time. In World War II Alaska, the wilderness wasn't just remote. It was legendary for swallowing men whole. The military had already lost pilots to these mountains, these valleys, these brutal winters that could drop temperatures to 40 below with winds that cut through standard issue gear like it was tissue paper. Search and rescue in this era was primitive by any modern standard. If your last known position was approximate, and his was, they might search for weeks and never come close. He knew all of this. And for a moment, standing in the debris field of what used to be his aircraft, he let himself feel it, the weight of it, the sheer, suffocating enormity of his situation. He was alone, injured, in one of the most hostile environments on the planet, in the middle of a war that didn't have time to stop for one missing airman. But then something shifted. Maybe it was training. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the face of someone he loved flickering behind his eyes like a pilot light refusing to go out. Whatever it was, his hands stopped shaking, not from warmth, but from decision. He made a choice in that wreckage field that would define the next 84 days of his life. He decided not to die today. The first priority was warmth, and he knew it. In Arctic survival, hypothermia is the silent killer. It moves faster than starvation, faster than dehydration, faster than almost anything else. Your body begins losing heat the moment exposure begins, and once your core temperature drops far enough, your decision-making degrades before you even realize it's happening. you start making bad choices. Slow choices. And out here, bad and slow are death sentences. He turned back to the wreckage and started pulling. Every piece of metal, every scrap of fabric, every component he could pry loose became a resource. Insulation from the cockpit lining, parachute silk, still partially intact, that could serve as wind-breaking material. Hydraulic fluid that might be coaxed into burning. A survival kit that had been partially crushed but still yielded a few precious items. A small knife, matches in a waterproof case, a signal mirror about the size of his palm. It wasn't much. It was everything. He worked with the systematic urgency of a man who understood that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Every movement was calculated, every item evaluated. He wasn't scavenging, he was building a mental database of what he had and what he could make from it. Because in the Alaskan wilderness, your creativity is your currency. Shelter came first. Not a permanent one that would come later, but something to break the wind before nightfall, which came fast and came hard this far north. He used the largest section of the fuselage as a windbreak, dragged broken branches from nearby spruce trees to create a crude lean-to against it, and packed snow around the base to seal out drafts. It wasn't warm, but it was warmer. Out here, warmer was victory. He got a fire going on the third attempt, hands trembling, fingers barely cooperating, face pressed close to the tiny flame, like it was the most precious thing in the world, because it was. When it finally caught, when that small orange light pushed back even a fraction of the darkness and the cold, he felt something he hadn't expected to feel in that moment. Hope, not confidence, not certainty, just that small, stubborn, irrational thing called hope. The belief that if he could make it through tonight, he might make it through tomorrow. And if he could make it through tomorrow, who knows? He didn't sleep that first night. He kept the fire alive instead, feeding it carefully, rationing his fuel. And as the temperature plummeted and the Alaskan wilderness closed in around him like a living thing, he made a promise to himself: I will not be another name they can't find. Day one was survival, and he survived it. He survived the crash, but the real war hadn't even started yet. Chapter 2. The battle for sustenance is where things get truly desperate. Stay with us. Hunger is patient. That's what people don't tell you. It doesn't announce itself dramatically on day one. It starts as a background noise, a quiet rumble, easy to push aside when adrenaline is still doing its job. But by day 3, it stops asking politely. By day 5, it becomes the loudest thing in your head. By day 7, it's not just a feeling anymore. It's a presence, a companion, a constant, gnawing negotiation between your body and your will. He had nothing to eat. What little emergency ration had been in the survival kit was gone within the first 2 days, eaten sparingly, but gone. The wilderness around him was theoretically full of food. Theoretically, but knowing that animals exist and actually catching them with improvised tools, injured hands, and no real hunting background are two entirely different realities. The first thing he went after was small game. Tracks in the snow, ptarmigan, Alaska's white-feathered ground birds, practically invisible against the winter landscape but present everywhere once you knew what to look for. He fashioned a snare from wire salvaged from the aircraft's electrical system, bent into a loop, attached to a bent sapling that would spring when triggered. It was crude. He'd never made one before, and his first 3 attempts caught exactly nothing. But he studied. He watched where the birds moved. He noticed patterns, the way they followed the same trails through the brush day after day. Creatures of habit, even in the wild. He repositioned his snares. He learned. On day 9, the sapling snapped. He didn't let himself feel relief until he was standing over it, a single ptarmigan. Small but real. Food, calories, life. He cooked it over the fire that night, eating every piece, cracking the bones to get at the marrow, wasting absolutely nothing. And when it was done, he sat in the firelight and felt something close to powerful. He could do this. Water was its own battle. Snow is not the survival resource most people think it is. Eating it raw drops your core temperature dangerously and yields very little actual hydration for the energy cost. He melted it instead, using a section of aluminum from the aircraft shaped into a crude pot, holding it over the fire until the snow became water, then drinking it slowly and deliberately. Hydration became a ritual, not an afterthought, but the real breakthrough came when he started looking at the wreckage differently. Not just as debris, as a workshop. The hydraulic tubing from the plane's control system could be hammered flat and shaped into a crude spear tip. The aluminum panels, bent and cut with his knife, became a hatchet blade lashed to a broken branch with strips of parachute cord. A piece of the windshield's outer frame became a crude saw. Every component that seemed useless at first glance became something when he asked the right question. What could this be? He made a fishing line from electrical wire, found a stream beneath the ice by listening. Water moves even under frozen surfaces, if you're quiet enough to hear it. Cut a hole with his improvised tools and spent hours in the brutal cold with his line in the water. The first day, nothing. The second day, a small grayling, a freshwater fish common in Alaskan streams. Small but absolutely packed with calories and fat his depleted body desperately needed. He learned to read the land. Animal trails became his map. The behavior of ravens overhead sometimes pointed to carcasses, food sources he wasn't too proud to compete for. He found signs of moose in the valley below his camp and spent days formulating how a single injured man might harvest something that large with minimal tools. He was strategic, patient. He had nothing but time and need. The cold complicated everything. Working with his hands in temperatures that hovered between 20 and 40 below zero meant that even basic tasks, tying knots, cutting material, starting a fire, took 3 times as long as they should. Frostbite was a constant threat. He developed a system: work for 10 minutes, warm hands at the fire for 5, repeat. Slow, maddening, necessary. He also made fire his science. Not just starting it, which he'd mastered out of necessity, but maintaining and transporting it. He learned to bank coals in a bed of ash so they survived the night without constant feeding. He learned which woods burned longest, which gave the most heat, which produced the least smoke. He learned that the aircraft's rubber insulation, when burned, created a dense black smoke visible from the air, a signal fire technique he began using during clear sky windows. Sending dark columns skyward whenever weather allowed, he was eating. Not well, not enough, but eating. And eating meant thinking clearly, and thinking clearly meant improving. Day by day, meal by painful meal, he was evolving from a crash survivor into something else, a wilderness operator. Someone the environment had tried to kill and instead had educated. He built a drying rack from spruce branches and began preserving meat, learning that even in the cold, proper preparation could extend his food supply. He mapped his immediate area, identifying his best hunting zones, his water source, his shelter, and his best signal fire position in relation to likely search flight paths. By day 20, he had a system. It wasn't comfortable, it wasn't safe, but it was a system, and in a situation where everything was trying to kill him, having a system was the difference between dying and not dying. He chose not dying. His body was surviving, but his mind that was becoming the real battlefield. Chapter 3. Mind over Matter reveals the psychological war happening inside him every single day. And this is where the story gets truly extraordinary. You can fix a broken shelter. You can find more food. You can add more wood to the fire. You cannot fix a broken mind. And out there, in the silence, in the white, in the endless repeating sameness of cold days and colder nights, the mind is the most dangerous thing you carry, because it doesn't shut off. It never stops. And when there's nothing to think about except survival and solitude, it starts generating its own content. Dark content. The kind that doesn't serve you. The hallucinations started. Around day 15, he didn't recognize them as hallucinations at first. That's the insidious thing about isolation-induced psychological stress. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps. He began seeing movement at the tree line. Figures that dissolved when he looked directly at them. He heard voices on the wind, specific voices, people he knew, calling his name. Once, he was completely convinced he heard a rescue plane and ran out of his shelter into the freezing dark, waving his signal mirror at a sky that contained nothing but stars. He stood there for a long time. Afterward, cold, foolish, alone, and he made a decision that might have saved his sanity more than anything else he did in those 84 days. He decided to document. He found paper in the survival kit, a small notepad, water damaged but still usable, and he began writing. Every day, not journal entries in any formal sense, but thoughts, observations, plans, arguments with himself about whether today had been better or worse than yesterday, and why. Records of what he'd eaten, what he'd seen, what he'd done. The act of writing served multiple purposes simultaneously. It gave his mind something to organize. It created a sense of progress and continuity, and it forced him to confront his psychological state honestly rather than letting it fester unchecked. He wrote about the hallucinations. He named them, described them, argued with them on paper. And something remarkable happened. Once documented, they became less powerful. They were still there, but they were his, acknowledged and classified. Rather than alien intrusions overwhelming him, he imposed structure on days that nature gave no structure to. He woke at the same time every morning, approximately, by the position of the light. He completed the same sequence of tasks, in the same order. Check the fire. Check the snares. Check the perimeter. Eat if there was food. Work on whatever the priority project was. He set himself goals that were achievable within a single day. Not survive 84 days. That was too enormous, too abstract, too terrifying. Today's goal, reinforce the south wall of the shelter. Today's goal, check the stream for fishing. Today's goal, spend 2 hours on signal fire preparation. Small goals. Completed goals. The psychological weight of completion, even tiny completion, cannot be overstated in an isolation scenario. Every finished task was evidence that he was still functioning, still capable, still the agent of his own story rather than a passive victim of circumstance. He also gave himself permission to feel things. This sounds simple, It is not. The masculine military culture of his era, and really of most eras, trained men to suppress, compartmentalize, and push through. And there's a place for that. But in total isolation, with no mission parameters and no external pressure to perform, suppression becomes its own form of psychological damage. The emotions don't disappear. They accumulate. They become weight. He cried on day 18. Sat down in the snow, back against a spruce tree, and just let it happen. Thought about everyone he missed. Let the grief of his situation be real and present for a specific, deliberate window of time. And then he stood up, wiped his face, and went back to work. Not because he'd solved anything, but because he'd processed something. There's a difference. What sustained him, and this is perhaps the most human part of the entire story, was a face. He never talked about it publicly in great detail. But in the accounts that survived, there are references to a specific person, someone he was going back to, someone whose existence meant the world had to be returned to, not abandoned. In the most brutal moments, the nights when the cold was extraordinary and the food was gone and the mind was manufacturing despair at industrial scale, he held on to that face like a handhold on a cliff, not a solution. A reason. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, wrote that a man can endure almost anyhow if he has a sufficient why. This airman had never read Frankl. The books weren't published yet. But he had lived the principle before anyone had written it down. He developed small rituals of hope. He kept a tally of days, not as a countdown to anything specific, because he didn't know when rescue would come, but as evidence of progress. Every mark was proof that he had been strong enough to survive one more day. The tally wasn't a measure of time running out. It was a record of victory. By day 40, his internal landscape had changed. He was still struggling. He was still afraid, still lonely, still in real physical danger every single day. But the psychological architecture had shifted. He was no longer a man trying not to die. He was a man actively living inside the most extreme parameters imaginable, but living, adapting, growing, in the strangest possible sense of the word. He later said, in one of the few interviews he gave, that the wilderness had stripped him of everything unnecessary, everything performative, all the social layers and self-presentations that normal life requires. What remained was something very quiet and very clear, the core of who he actually was. And that core, it turned out, was someone who didn't quit. The mind that had tried to destroy him had ultimately become his greatest weapon. He'd won the mental war. Now he was going to do something nobody expected. He was going to innovate. Chapter 4 shows how his tactics evolved so far beyond any training that they changed what we thought humans were capable of. There's a point in extreme survival situations where training ends and something else begins. Training is what keeps you alive in the first 72 hours. It provides templates, protocols, immediate action drills for the worst-case scenario. Drink water, signal for rescue, create shelter, maintain core temperature. These aren't wrong, they're essential. They're the foundation. But after 72 hours, training starts to run out. Because training anticipates a rescue window. It was never designed for 84 days. By the time he hit the 1-month mark, he had long since left the territory of anything his military survival training had prepared him for. He was operating entirely on improvisation, observation, and a scientific method born of desperation. Try something, evaluate the result, adjust, try again. Fail faster, learn faster, improve constantly. His shelter evolution is one of the most remarkable examples. He began with the aircraft fuselage, windbreak, functional but exposed. Then he built the lean-to better. But as weeks passed, he studied the environment with the eyes of someone who had nothing but time and motivation. He noticed that spruce trees held enormous amounts of accumulated snow in their lower branches, heavy, insulating snow that created pockets of relatively warmer air near the ground. He began incorporating live trees into his shelter structure, using their natural snow accumulation as walls, digging slightly into the earth to get below the wind line, using layers of spruce bough as ground insulation. His final shelter was a semi-subterranean structure that maintained temperatures 10 to 15 degrees, warmer than the outside air, not comfortable, but survivable in a way his original windbreak never was. He predicted weather, not with instruments, with observation. He learned the specific cloud formations that preceded blizzards in his region. He noticed that certain animals behaved differently 12 to 18 hours before a major weather event. Birds went quiet. Rabbit activity dropped. The wind changed in a specific way he couldn't have described before, but now recognized immediately. He used these signals to plan his day. High-risk activities, hunting at distance, gathering wood from exposed areas, happened on days that read as stable. He sheltered on blizzard days, conserving calories, staying warm, doing only interior tasks. He became a student of the terrain in a way that went far beyond navigation. He understood drainage patterns and could predict where water would be accessible under ice based on topography. He understood how ridgelines affected wind direction and used this to position his signal fires for maximum smoke visibility from the most likely search corridors. He understood that large predators, bears, were denning in winter, but wolverines were active year-round, followed specific movement patterns, and he structured his own camp and activity areas to minimize conflict while occasionally benefiting from what they left behind. He built a travois, a simple drag frame used by indigenous peoples for millennia from aircraft aluminum and spruce poles, allowing him to transport significantly heavier loads of wood and materials than he could carry. He made snowshoes from bent saplings and parachute cord webbing that, while crude, dramatically reduced the energy cost of moving through deep snow, a physiologically critical innovation. When calories were precious, he engineered a reflective signal system using multiple pieces of the aircraft's polished aluminum, positioned to catch sunlight from multiple angles rather than requiring him to actively aim a single mirror. On clear days, he could create a passive signal array that reflected light across a wide sky arc, while he attended 2 other tasks. None of this was in any manual. None of it was in his training. Every single adaptation was invented in the field, under pressure, by a mind that had been stripped of every distraction and honed to a single purpose. There were moments that pushed past even these of old capabilities, moments that seemed to require something beyond strategy, beyond skill. A blizzard on day 52 that trapped him in his shelter for 4 consecutive days, during which he burned his remaining reserves and nearly lost his fire. He survived it by making a decision that seemed counterintuitive. He reduced his physical activity to nearly 0, lying still for hours to conserve heat and calories, entering an almost meditative state that kept his core temperature stable while minimizing expenditure. It was exactly the wrong thing to do by conventional wisdom. Stay active, generate heat. But he knew his situation was different. His fuel was too low. Movement would spend calories he didn't have. He lay still and calculated and waited. On day 6, he saw a search plane. It was distant, a small dot against the sky. Audible before visible, following a search corridor several miles south of his position. He had approximately 90 seconds. He hit every element of his signal system simultaneously. Signal mirror aimed directly at the aircraft. Signal fire lit with the rubber insulation pile he'd been saving for exactly this moment, sending a column of dense black smoke straight up into the clear air. The plane continued on its course and disappeared. He didn't break down. He evaluated. The smoke had gone up clean and high, a good column. The mirror had been active. If they had a search pattern grid, his position was now marked with a smoke signal even after he'd stopped producing it. He made notes in his journal. He kept the fire burning for 3 more hours, and he added to his signal array the next morning, expanding it. 17 days later, on day 84, a different aircraft found him. The exact sequence of events that led to his discovery included reports from that first search plane of an anomalous smoke signature in a grid section that had been otherwise negative. His improvised signal hadn't been seen in real time, but it had been logged, and it had brought them back. He had engineered his own rescue, not through luck, through innovation, persistence, and an absolute refusal to accept that the situation was beyond him. He survived. He was rescued. But what came after, the scars, the silence, and the legacy he left behind, is the part of the story that will stay with you longest. Chapter 5 brings it all home. Rescue doesn't end a survival story. It begins a different one. When they finally reached him, when human voices were real and not hallucinations. When warm hands touched his shoulders and someone said, "We've got you," he reportedly didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat there. Let it be real. Made sure it was real before he allowed himself to believe it. He had lost over 50 pounds. His hands bore the lasting marks of frostbite. His feet had been compromised and would give him trouble for the rest of his life. His body had been pushed to a biological edge that most humans never approach, and from which some never fully return. The physical accounting of 84 days in the Alaskan winter was written into his body permanently. A document no one else could read, but that he would carry every day from that moment forward. The psychological reintegration was its own long journey. He came back from the wilderness to a world that had continued moving without him, a war still raging, people who had begun to grieve him, a life that had started the slow process of closing the space he'd left. Stepping back into that was profoundly disorienting. He had spent nearly 3 months with no social complexity whatsoever, no performance, no expectation, just the pure, simple, brutal transaction of survival. And now suddenly there were meals with silverware and conversations, with subtext and fluorescent lights, and the 1,000 invisible social contracts of normal life pressing in. From every direction, he struggled. He was honest about that in the rare moments he spoke about it. The wilderness had changed the architecture of how he processed the world. Crowded rooms felt wrong. Noise felt wrong. The abundance of food, which should have felt like relief, initially felt almost threatening. Some part of him still rationing, still calculating. His sleep was disrupted for months by dreams of cold, of fire, of silence. He also struggled with being called a hero. He deflected it consistently, almost irritably. In his framing, he hadn't done anything heroic. He'd done what anyone would do when the only alternative was dying. He'd made the choices in front of him, day by day, without any particular courage or greatness. He'd just refused. That's all. Just refused. But that refusal, that simple, stubborn, daily act of refusing, is exactly what makes the story extraordinary. Because most humans never encounter a test severe enough to find out what they're actually made of. He encountered it and discovered something that no training manual, no personality assessment, no peacetime achievement could have revealed, that at his core, he was someone who could not be broken. Not by cold, not by hunger, not by isolation, not by time. The things he brought back from those 84 days weren't just survival techniques, though those are remarkable in their own right and were documented extensively by military survival training programs afterward, with several of his improvised methods incorporated into official curriculum. He brought back a philosophy, a way of seeing problems, a relationship with difficulty that the rest of us only theorize about. He used to say, and this is the line that gets quoted most, that the wilderness didn't teach him to be strong. It taught him that he already was. That's the thing about extreme adversity. When you come out the other side of it, it doesn't create the qualities that carry you through. It reveals them. The grit was always there. The ingenuity was always there. The stubbornness, the love, the primal refusal, all already present, waiting for the circumstances that would demand them. His story is not just a World War II footnote. It is not just an Alaskan survival record. It is a document of what human beings are capable of when everything is stripped away and the only question left is, how badly do you want to keep going? And the answer, his answer, written in cold and hunger and 84 days of impossible mornings, is this: badly enough. Always badly enough. He went back to Alaska once, years after the war, stood near the area where the crash had happened, though the wreckage was long gone, reclaimed by decades of weather and wilderness. He stood there quietly for a while, looking at the mountains, at the spruce forests, at the enormous, indifferent sky. Then he turned around and went home. He had nothing left to prove to this place, and this place had nothing left to take from him. The wilderness had tried its absolute worst, and the man had walked out anyway. That's the story. That's the legacy. Not a military decoration or a survival record or a footnote in a history book, though it is all of those things. The real legacy is simpler and more durable than any of that. It's the proof recorded in the body of one man, in the Alaskan wilderness, during the worst war in human history, that the human spirit, when it decides not to quit, is genuinely, astonishingly, almost impossibly hard to kill. 84 days. One man, no rescue, no guarantee, just the choice made fresh every single morning to keep going. If this story moved you, share it, because some stories are too important to stay untold. And if you're facing something impossible right now, remember, he didn't survive 84 days all at once. He survived them one day at a time. You can do the same.